My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, but I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello everybody and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay and here with me today is pianist and associate professor at the UH Moore School of Music and haver of a very fun name to say, Tali Morgulis. She is both a soloist and chamber musician. Her teaching and her performing have taken her all over the world. She's been featured on WQXR and WGBH, and we're actually going to be using music from her latest recording on today's show. It's called Archipelago of Light, and it's on the Delos label, which I hope I'm saying right. Tali, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What are you going to be teaching me about today?
We're going to talk about Brazilian and Argentinian music, and I would like to talk about some trends in this music generally, and then talk about the composers on the CD. And then more specifically, probably towards the end of our session, we might talk about rhythm, because I think all of these composers have very interesting approach to rhythm and very, very different from one another.
I'm really looking forward to this because we've mentioned like Villa-Lobos on our show before and Piazzolla, but we've never talked in depth about music from South America. You know, most of what we talk about is very Eurocentric, and so I'm really interested to kind of see what's up with these guys.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that word Eurocentric.
Yeah.
I think we're very Eurocentric in our classical music education.
Yeah.
I think it's changing these days over the past few decades. But for example, when I was getting my education, no one of my music history or theory classes, I've studied these guys. I've heard their names and I've heard them perform, but they weren't considered as important or as innovative as the Europeans were. So, but I think there's a fantastic material out there. It's just pretty amazing and colorful and very original too.
There are 4 composers whose pieces you play on your CD, and those are the ones we're going to be talking about.
Right.
It's Piet. I'll let you pronounce it.
Okay, so the Argentinian 2 are Ginastera or Ginastera, whatever you wish, and Piazzolla. And the Brazilians are Villa-Lobos and Prado.
Okay, cool. So who were these guys? And did they know each other?
Well, Ginastera and Piazzolla are very, very tightly connected because Ginastera was Piazzolla's teacher. There's very tiny age difference between them. While Villa-Lobos and Prado, there's a very big difference between them, age difference. When Villa-Lobos died, Prado was only 16 years old or very young. Villa-Lobos is the oldest one of the group. He was born in 1887. So all of the pieces were composed in the 20th century, but Villa-Lobos is the most classical of these 4.
Got it. Well, I'm kind of fascinated about the fact that the classical music was born in Europe, and these guys were, far away from that center, and yet there they are in this completely different culture.
As you said, there was huge immigration to South America in the 19th century. So all the Italian and German and Polish influences are there, present, as well as in North American music. But it's this fusion with the Indians of South America and with the African influences that makes this music so amazing and exotic sounding and unusual.
I like unusual.
Right.
Let's hear some of this unusual music. I think we're going to hear Ginastera's Sonata No. 1.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a very long time in South America, everything European was considered cultured, and art music would be in Europe, and folk music, something more primitive, kind of looked down upon, would be the native, Indian, African, anything that is not urban and not European would be looked down on. And that was the situation for a long time, the whole of 19th century. And I think in beginning of the 20th century, composers started exploring their native music, their folk music, and incorporating that. So what it means, the way the merge happened is the structures, the bigger structure of the piece would be very much European. The form, the genres, they wrote symphonies, they wrote quartets, they wrote sonatas. Mm-hmm. It's all very classically influenced, European influenced, while the rhythms and the melodic aspects of the music were more taken from the native. With Ginastera, in terms of his very tight structures, he's superb craftsman, and he studied all over the map, and he was very, very well educated in that strict type of European, way.
Who were Ginastera's influences?
One of the big influences was Bartók, and you can really hear that in this particular movement and this particular sonata. This whole movement of incorporating the native music into merging the classical music and the native music of South America is very much like what Bartók was doing with Eastern European music. Okay. Researching Romanian and Bulgarian and Hungarian folk music.
Yeah.
And incorporating it into his modern style.
I see. So essentially, these guys over in South America were doing the same thing, but their folk influences just had a really different flavor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. That's very cool. It does sound so contemporary.
Right. It sounds contemporary because the harmonies are contemporary.
Yeah.
At the same time, you feel that rhythmic drive in it, which is almost like there's something very primitive about it.
Yeah, it's got a real urgency to it.
Right.
Like it's on its way somewhere.
Right. Right. It's very percussive. Uh-huh. And as you said, it just has this very driven kind of quality to it.
I'm interested, too, in Europe. There seemed to be a sort of, I don't know how formal, maybe it was very formal, system of when somebody was becoming a classical music composer or a musician, they went to the universities and they became officially a part of this tradition and a part of this world. There was a sort of vetting that seemed to go on, and was that the case also with these guys in South America? What was it like there?
For the most part. In the beginning of 19th century, the colonial, regime ended and most of the countries got their independence, and that's where the conservatories and music schools started emerging.
I see.
European immigrants were initiating it, or you probably wouldn't call them immigrants or colonizers. I'm not sure what they were, but it was very, very much influenced by European traditional classical music, and the same format was used for conservatories and music schools for younger children, and then universities and all that. It was a very similar system. Yeah. However, since these two countries are so gigantic, Brazil and Argentina are very big, and there's so much talent and there's so much folk music going on everywhere, and such vast differences between all that. There was still culture of musicianship that is not formalized by conservatories, and Villa-Lobos is a very, very interesting example of that. He was a self-taught musician until very, very late point in his life, even though his father is a musician. Mm-hmm. And so there's always this this again fusion in his music of this intuitive musicianship. And some general music education, but not the formal conservatory trained musicianship. But he's actually one of the exceptions in terms of really getting to that point in his career where he's very, very famous and often played and all that, but not formally educated.
Yeah, you hear about that, I mean, in other kinds of music, it's pretty common, like rock musicians and pop musicians. Like, it's pretty atypical for people to go through formal training. Like, it's music that comes from the gut, Right. But it's rare to hear about that.
Right. Well, I guess that's the beauty of that part of the world, that I don't think it would have been possible in Europe. Probably not.
Yeah, so a guy like him maybe would not have thrived
right.
in that formal environment. Interesting.
Very folk-like melody for its tune.
I don't know if it's the key or what it is, but for some reason that reminds me of Debussy's piano music.
It's not the key. It's Villa-Lobos.
Okay.
He was very much influenced by French music.
Oh, okay.
And I want to say part of it is language, Portuguese language. Brazilians speak Portuguese language, not Spanish like the rest of South Americans. Portuguese language is very close to French language, and it's kind of a mix of Spanish with French, especially the way it sounds. It's much more melodic.
Yeah, it's very melodic. I love Portuguese.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And it's supposed to be one of the most difficult languages to learn ever because I'm assuming because there are influences from so many other languages.
Right. I mean, Villa-Lobos was probably the most influential Brazilian composer in the history, and I'm sure pretty much everybody would agree with me, even in Brazil. Just in terms of going back to the roots and combining that with the European tradition and creating something that is classical yet very geographically influenced.
Yeah.
Piazzolla is kind of a odd, strange crossover figure because it's tango music that was popular genre that was born at the end of 19th century, very much looked down on. And when it came from Buenos Aires to Europe, it was condemned by everybody.
Really?
Starting from Vatican to Polish, government and whatever, because it was, it originated, the history of tango is very interesting, and nowadays we don't even realize that that's where it came from. It came from bordels and cabarets of Buenos Aires. And was danced originally by two men. And it was very, I want to say, aggressive in a way.
Yeah.
And then eventually it became much more sensual. And it was like an epidemic in Argentina. It just took off. And people just loved it and danced it everywhere. And then eventually brought it back to Europe.
Yeah. It's like the break dancing of the day.
Yeah, sort of like that. Yeah,
people tangoing on like cardboard on street corners. No, you did not have that. Never mind.
So tango was this popular genre that had nothing to do with classical music until Piazzolla came into this tango stage. And he was tango player who was educated in classical music and even went to study with the famous Nadia Boulanger in Paris, with whom a lot of famous composers that we know studied. And so it was her influence. He said that he brought quartets and symphonies to the lessons with her. And she said, well, it's all really well crafted, but I don't hear Piazzolla in this. And so that led him to think that maybe he needs to look for himself, compositionally speaking, elsewhere. And that's where he started incorporating his tango playing. He was playing in bands and composing tango music. That's where he started merging these two
Oh, I
things.
see. I see. But brought those two worlds together.
Yeah, brought these two worlds together and created something that is called now Tango nuevo, which is new tango, the whole new style.
We should hear some of the Piazzolla that you just mentioned so we can hear the tango that drew you to this music.
Okay.
Would
Let's just do the first tango from the suite.
It's really playful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see why that might be fun to play. It sounds like you're just bouncing all over the keyboard.
Right. I mean, rhythm for me is very, very important. This is something that I really like exploring. And I kind of feel it in my gut, something that really kind of drives my musical response to music is very often rhythm.
I can't remember who I was talking with, forgive me, other classical classroom guest, but we were talking about the importance of that beat in music because it's tunes into our heartbeat, and there's something sort of just innate that appeals to us about music with a rhythm and a beat. And I would say arguably you don't hear a lot of that in much of the European classical music, at least that I know of. Would you say that that's accurate? Is that atypical for European classical music?
I think some composers are more interested in that than others.
Yeah.
But it's not, as you said, it's not that primary force. Maybe I should say there are more components that play into it, like harmony and melody, and probably melodic texture of it is more important to Europeans. All this bel canto, Italian stuff. I think in all this discussion of rhythm, we have to remember that the first instruments that humans invented were percussion instruments.
Is that true?
I mean, it's just the simplest thing. I mean, it's there. You always have that, right? You always have your voice, and you always have something to tap on or strike, and it's just very, very kind of primitive, easy, very basic thing that we have is that rhythmic drive, and that's why a lot of rituals are centered around drums and people dancing to the rhythm.
What do you think that it says about Western classical music that element sort of falls by the wayside?
Well, I think also our ability to sing is very innate and very basic. So I almost want to say that Europeans kind of took that singing element more as their... I mean, it's all very general. I mean, what I'm saying right now, it's all big generalization. But I think there's something to it that, singing and singing in a chorus later and different parts of counterpoint and polyphony that we see in European development, that's kind of the base of it.
I see.
While the South Americans stuck with the African, more drum.
There's something that's very that just connects with you with that rhythm. That sort of it's more fun. I think that's the bottom line of what I'm trying to say. It seems like more fun music to me.
just wanted to mention Prado. I just wanted us to hear some of his music. And I just because we talked so much about rhythm, I wanted to have an example of something that does not really have rhythm.
Okay.
Which I thought was really cool.
Okay.
So his music is very much influenced by all things spiritual and ecological.
Okay.
And this is island. So he described this exotic islands of probably Brazil or other South American place. And he's all about color. He's really all about harmonies and color and silence. And he studied with Messiaen in France. So again, you see that Brazilian French influence.
Okay.
But I feel that he's not into rhythm in that organized, driven way that others are into. He's very much into timing, but his timing is not organized in metric form.
I see. Wow. Well, John Williams was obviously influenced by sounds like Jaws.
Yeah, so this is constantly moving, but it's not doesn't have that driven pulse to it. Doesn't have that organized, obvious meter to it.
That sounded like a wave coming in, the way that it...
Right.
Yeah.
And this one has more of a suspense and silence.
There's more suspense? That was pretty suspenseful.
Something that has more rests and silences. He's into listening to this decay of the sound of the piano. How the sound changes as it goes on.
As it fades away.
Fades away.
Yeah, that's neat.
So it's a very, very different sense of pulse and metric energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, that it's more about clashing notes and things like that than it is about that percussive thing that the other composers you can really hear in their work.
It just appeals to me, this music. Okay. I don't play it because it's important. I think it's very powerful. I think it tells me something. It communicates certain feeling to me. So that's why this is why I chose it. That's why I play it. And I feel that audience responds really well to it. There's all kinds of feelings in this.
So what is that? What is that feeling that you get from these four composers?
I don't know. There's no one single common denominator, I would say. But everyone has a different world. And it's somewhat, for me, being educated as in Eurocentric way, for me, all of it sounds somewhat exotic.
Yeah. Yeah, is that maybe the appeal? Is that you're getting to do something very different than what you're accustomed to doing?
Absolutely.
Brings an element of fun into playing, maybe?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it all started with Piazzolla for me, hearing his tangos and falling in love with them and starting, that's how I got into all this. That was my starting point.
The other thing I was wondering, and we kind of started talking about this at the beginning of the show, you were saying that like when you were in school studying music, you didn't study these guys. Do you think that's changed now, and that these composers are, because our world is so much more connected now,
right?
And so much more accepting of being multicultural and multi-ethnic, do you think that they are now sort of more respected than they were and being studied?
I think they are. Yeah, I think the borders are more open. I think we're incorporating into the curriculum much more now than we used to.
Yeah.
And also all this ethnomusicology departments and classes that we have in almost any music school help that.
Right. And I'm sure that's just opening up a whole new world for this generation of composers that's coming up now.
Absolutely.
It would be really interesting to see like where they take this. Learning about not just the European, but this like broader scope of the classical music world.
Right.
Like where they take that. Right. So cool. Tali Morgulis, whose name is so much fun to say, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming in. I know you're a busy lady.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure talking to you.
And if you guys want to learn more about this music, hear more of this music, Tali's new CD is called Archipelago of Light. For more Classical Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. You can also go to our SoundCloud page where you will find an exhaustive list of everything we've ever created. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. You can listen on Stitcher Radio. You can also make sure to like us and follow us and review us on any of those ways that you listen to us. Thanks to our audio producer, Todd Tango Hulslander, for making us sound delightful. To program director Sinjin Flem for directing us programmatically. To Tali Morgulis for taking the time to be on our show. To me for saying words, but most of all to you, dear listeners, for listening. We'll catch you next time.